is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 260 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dana Pittman, and we're going to be talking all about how to write multi-dimensional villains. Couple of comments on the Black Heron episode 25 on Patreon. Cassie said this was great. Thanks for the peek inside on how you and your team work. Something for consideration as authors evolve and grow their business. We don't have to do it all. Matt Goodall said, it's always a treat to hear the two of you. Can't wait for the next time it's in person. In personal news and updates then, it is Wednesday the 11th of September and the Amazon situation is almost sorted. So they basically found the problem. My bank rejected the payment, which who knows why. I've now moved all my payments back to a high street bank, which may or may not be the right thing, but for now I'm doing it because I never had a problem receiving payments that way. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get paid that money from last month until the end of this month. So the end of this month is going to be a bumper month. Essentially, I'll get 2 lots of wages, but it is a short, sharp reminder that at any point you could not have income. So it's been a good reminder that saving a pot of wages is really important, you know, like a backup just in case you don't get paid like this month. So that was a great reminder for me, and hopefully it's a great reminder for you guys as well. Don't invest absolutely every single penny. Make sure you put some aside just in case you need it. Inside the business, I mean. So yeah, I'm just glad that it's sorted and that it will be returned to me at the end of this month. As this airs on Wednesday, the 18th of September, my second Kickstarter is going to go live. No, it will already be live. It will have gone live on Monday, the 16th of September at 5 p.m. So I am ridiculously excited for that. I will make sure that the link is in the show notes if you'd like to go and check it out. I'm kind of really nervous because I don't know. I guess the second one feels like there's more pressure on it. I think we had about 269 or 289 followers for the first one. And that came out just a few pounds short of £26,000 British pounds. This time we have 635 followers as of this morning. I can't quite fathom that. That seems like an awful lot of followers. So I'm very pleased about that. And obviously, as I'm speaking, we still have almost a week left to go. Well, no, I guess 5 days left to go before it launches. So yeah, we could still, maybe we'll get closer to 650, who knows? So I'm very, very excited about that. What I'm less excited about is the fact that I have a book to finish. So I am very, very, very late on this. I lost a bit of childcare over the summer holidays, which derailed me quite a bit. I've lost a few days here and there that have derailed me, and I had a bit more work to do on the first 20k of the book. I had to fix it, which I wouldn't normally have to do at this late stage. But a gap and going on holiday obviously then has meant Intellection, thank you, has decided to change things. So I have fixed all of the things and given a light edit on that first 20k, which I'm hoping means that it's a lot easier of a process when I then come to do the editing later this month. But I now have to get to the end of the book pretty much by the 22nd, so 11 days from now, 12 days from now. I do have a little bit of wiggle room, but genuinely we're talking about a matter of days. We're not talking about a matter of weeks. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, and I'm probably going to fall off the face of the planet in order to try and get that done. So that is pretty much my focus for the next 2 weeks and really for the rest of this month. Other than that, the only other thing that I am working on is obviously the Kickstarter, which obviously is huge, big deal. That's going to require loads of work. In between writing a whole book. No, I'm kidding. It's like only 60k. Nervous laughter. Okay, all right. I'm going to move on because otherwise I'm going to terrify myself. The Rebel of the Week this week is Matthew. Matthew says, this is less of a rebellion and more of a childhood faux pas. I should provide some context and say that I was brought up in a very loving but religious home. We were never allowed to swear. My mum always taught us that you could say bread and butter with the right meaning and the right tone, and that was the equivalent of swearing. I think you'll agree, though, that if you bang your shin on the coffee table, bread and butter is not usually the first phrase that comes out of your mouth. Now, there's a stage of language acquisition where children learn the rules about how words work. This particular one involves swapping letters of words around, which often creates nonsensical words. There we go, I swapped some letters around there. For example, give way becomes with gay, car ride becomes ra-kide, and so on. I was about 8 in the back of the car, cheerfully doing this, my parents chuckling away with each new variation. Then we drove past our local fried chicken franchise, which was which was unfortunately named Friar Tuck's. It's no... I'm sorry. It's no stretch of the imagination to work out that when I said try a fucks, the car went very silent. When I got home, I wasn't in trouble. But I was advised that the word I said was not a word I should say again. Oh my God, this delighted me so much. Well, whether it was a rebellion or a faux pas, I thought it was bloody lovely. So thank you for that. If you would like to be a faux pas or a rebel of the week, then please do send in your story. It can be any kind of rebellion, something big, something small, or something in between. You can email your story to Becca over on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. One new patron this week, welcome, and many thanks to Kylie Haddix. And a big thank you to all of my existing patrons. If you would like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes, as well as bonus content like our writing group sessions that are called Poison and Prose, our masterclasses. In fact, as this goes live, I will be teaching the sweet and spicy sex class. Also have our Slack community group where we all chit chat and answer each other's questions and give each other a whole lot of moral support. So you can get access to all of that from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. This episode is sponsored by Fictionary Storyteller. Fictionary Storyteller Premium Certification is one of the only certificates out there that really focuses on story plot, characters, structure, and setting. If you've ever wondered what it takes to be a story editor, also known as a developmental editor, or if you've ever, fancied yourself as a developmental editor, but you're not sure where to start, then you're going to want to check out Fictionary Storyteller. I was actually their first ever certified editor, an accolade that I'm rather proud of, and I really thoroughly enjoyed the course. And one of the reasons I think it's so brilliant is because you actually have to submit a fully developmentally edited manuscript. So you have to do the work and prove that you can edit before you'll get certified. Extensive program that will teach you all of the elements of story that you need in order to be able to do a developmental edit. And it will help you focus on what is important in a developmental edit versus all of the other types of edits. More than that, it is a great way to start or boost your editing career because users of Fictionary software often end up hiring story coach editors to edit their manuscripts too. What's more exciting is that Fictionary are also offering all listeners 25% off Storyteller, so that's the one for writers, and Storyteller Premium and Certification. So that's for those of you who want to become editors. And you can get that by using the code REBEL25. That's REBEL25. That's enough from me today. Let's get on with the episode. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dana Pittman. Dana is a certified developmental editor, USA Today best-selling romance and P&R author, and the chief storyteller at Danger Tales. She helps writers write addictive romance and fantasy novels. Hello and welcome.
Awesome. Oh, sorry. I was like listening your voice change. Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about having this discussion about villains and antagonists, and so all of the good stuff.
Amazing. And like, I love knowing that you're writing and coming from kind of like a PNR fantasy background too, because I'm currently writing vampires. So yeah, I'm like excited to hear what you have to say. But before we get into the topic of villains, which is my favorite topic ever, would you like to tell everyone a little bit about you and your journey? Like, how did you get to where you are today?
Well, so that I won't bore people, because when you do these interviews, it's like, okay, you told the same story last time. But I would say the thing that came to my mind when I thought about that question was I went into this a little bookstore in Austin, Texas that had all African American bookstore. It was a Black bookstore. It was back in the day what we used to call the Essence Reporting bookstore, which they don't do anymore. And when I went in there, I started talking to the owner, and she led me to this bookcase because I couldn't decide what to get that had all indie authors.
Oh my God, I love it.
And she's like, "Do you mind if I help you?" And I'm like, "Sure." And she led me down this rabbit hole of reading books that had characters that looked like me. And if you can't tell, I'm African American. So, that had Black women, Black stories. And for somebody that was from the inner city living in the projects, I was like, oh, like we can be lawyers and we can be doctors and we can be, and it just literally that visit to that bookstore changed my life. And so it started me on this journey of reading again, and reading turned into working with authors. I did services where I used to book them on shows and radio shows and get them into signings. And then I became a developmental editor and a writer. And it was all because of going into that bookstore and reading. I read the first book was The Price of Passion by Evelyn Palfrey. And then I got started reading Beverly Jenkins and Rochelle Ellers and, all of the great Black romance authors, but that was it. Like that was the thing. And who knew? Like when I talked to Miss Beverly, and the last time I talked with um Evelyn, Miss Evelyn, it was like you guys literally changed my life. Like how I raised my kids, how I my marriage, like everything in my life changed because I went in that bookstore. So that's how I got here.
I love that story so much. And like, I'm so grateful to the pioneering authors who take that chance, well, not chance, take that risk of putting their authentic voice into fiction when there are no other authors doing that and writing those, true stories and lived experiences. And I know for me, certainly, like so I have a complex relationship with kind of ethnicity and race because my grandfather is from Africa. My dad is American and my mum is white. But then on the other side, I have a lot of European and Israeli and stuff in me. So I have like this really complex, yeah, relationship with it. But even more than that, I never read a story with a queer person in until I was an adult. And
Yeah.
so that, like, when you were talking, it really reminded me of my own experience when, like, I read a story with a lesbian in it and also, like, a lesbian romance, more importantly. Like, that was a really defining moment for me. And I don't know how you felt reading before, but I know that when I read that first book, it was like I actually had emotions about fiction in a way that I hadn't had emotions about fiction before.
I think it's this weird thing, and I think it's overlooked because we do have access, but the reality is it's still a very, very small percentage of the overall, whether you want to say population or the source of your material. But the reality is it gives this weird sense of permission, and it almost is as if it uncorks this whole thing in your brain of like there are queer relationships, and they fall in love because you fall in love, right? Like when you think about it, it's like duh. but seeing it on the page and experiencing it, one of the things that I love to tell my clients is like the author reader relationship is so special because readers invite you in between the most sacred space in our bodies, which is
Mm.
between our ears. It invites you into our brains. When we're reading your story, it goes straight from our eyes if you're reading into our heads, or if you're listening, it goes straight from your ears into our heads. And it's such a very a sacred, important relationship, whether you're doing swinging from the chandeliers or you are, writing this epic fantasy or you're writing nonfiction, it's still there. And I think having representation and however you do that in your books, I think it's amazing. And for me, I had a very small world before I went into that bookstore. And I was a person that at that time I was in AP honors classes. I had read all types of literature, but hadn't read anything that had somebody who like I could say, oh wow, like I know that person. And it has affected me in so many ways. And that's why when people say all this stuff about romance, I'm like, romance changes lives and not just the steamy bits, right? It's a whole spectrum of emotions, which we'll talk about today, that we get access to because we get access to books.
Although I think sometimes the steamy bits do too, because they
Yeah, they
almost
do.
say to people who might be thinking, oh, well, these urges are weird and unnatural or whatever. They say to them, no, you are valid. I see you. Your feelings and emotions and desires and wants are valid in the same way that we are saying to all kinds of diverse people that you are valid, your existence is worthy and valid, and we see you, and that's why you're in our books, kind of thing. So I absolutely love that. I have like goosebumps even
Yeah,
talking about this stuff.
and that you're not alone. I think that's the other
Yeah.
part because it can be isolating. And I can only imagine if you are just as a woman who's a Black woman, who in my original profession, I was a lawyer. Like when I was working in a law firm, like I was the only person of color on my floor other than my assistant, right? And so when you have existences where you are very much almost isolated in a thing that should be normal, it makes you feel even more isolated, right?
Yeah.
So when you have this permission, and then when that permission validates the little whisper inside of you, like you got a story in you, and you like lean in,
Yeah,
it
it's
just gets all the feels, all the
so
feels.
true. I still remember when I was working in corporate and I was asked to be in this like video promoting the organization. And I was like, why do you want me to be in the
Because you're the
video?
double check mark person.
And and it was literally because I wasn't white or not as white as everybody else, and I wasn't straight. And I was like, fuck you, no. Like, I am not being your bloody poster child. Anyway, right. So we're going to talk about villains, which is my favorite topic. But like, why do you like them? What made you fall in love with them? I want to know that before we go into the details.
Here's the thing. I am a person where it's so that's why I was like when interview questions, I always get so tongue tied because I'm the person where I read so much and my interest comes from questions of like, well, why? And I remember the first time when I was writing a romantic suspense and my readers were begging me to do a story about my antagonist or about my villain in my story. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I kept thinking, like, how are you going to do this? Because I wasn't even planning for it to be a sequel. And I wasn't planning to do a story about him. And then the thing came to my mind is like, most people don't wake up saying, I'm going to be bad today. I'm going to ruin everyone's lives. I'm sure there's somebody, but you know what I mean. And so then my question became, well, then why? What was it that motivated? What was it that changed? And even as I thought about today, it was like the thought of like, what was the hurt that was so insurmountable in their life that it changed the trajectory of everything? It's the flip side of what we just talked about. And so that's where I really started falling in love with this thought of villains and antagonistic energy and having to communicate it in a way that it's not just this sideshow. If it becomes an integral part of your story, it makes your protagonist better. It makes the reading experience better. And I do believe that there's different levels of it. But to me, it was always this curious thing of like, growing up in an environment when I knew that there were people who did illegal things, right? And you didn't see them as bad people because they did illegal things. It was like this necessary evil sort of vibe. I wouldn't have said it that way as a kid, but or a young person, but I know that now. And so I think what it does to me, just like our conversation a few minutes ago, is it humanizes an experience, whether we like it or not. It's not saying that it's right and to me, if I think if we do it right, and some people do, we do it in different ways, but if we do it in a way that really resonates with our readers, we're mirroring an experience. It may be depicted in a human, or it may be depicted in a vampire, or it may be depicted in some sort of, evil genius or whatever, but it is a mirror. And I'm hoping one of the examples that I share today will help to even bring that a little, that context home even more. But yeah, I just feel like it just made me feel like, oh, I get it. So in that situation, I really had to think back, like, where did he come from? And people think it's weird when you're talking about like a fictitious character, but I'm like, what would make him come here? Me knowing him now after writing a whole novel with him being there, how did he get here? And when I went back to that and I wrote a small little short story about how he got into the position where he was a leader of this rebel group, but he was originally recruited or stolen from his tribe and pulled into it. And that was his way of getting back. And now he was the bad guy.
I
Right.
love it.
And so that just make you feel like, oh, right. So that's what it was. It's like being curious and nosy and humanizing an experience.
What do you think are the elements that make a good villain?
Oh, I think there's so many, but what I kind of like to lump them into is like when you can sort of a person that operates in the gray spaces. And so that may be like their background, what motivates them. I find that, what is the heart behind what causes them to do what they do. And sometimes that's going to, that it overshadows like their ethics, it overshadows their morals, it overshadows sometimes what we would think is for the greater good. But more than anything, I think is that like the villains really do give us an opportunity to explore the spectrum of emotions that can really heighten a story. Um, and I think you can have, if you have all of it, it's really good. But even if you have some of it, it will usually make your story better if you don't have any of it before.
Who do you have any like villain favorites, either from like movie or TV show or books? Like
Yes.
any that kind of jump out at you? I've got my favorites, but
Okay. Tell me your favorites before I tell you my favorite.
so like I can't move past Agent Smith. I just think he's so fantastic. Like his monologue, his ideology, and the fact that like it's all really driven from a base desire of survival for his species, and the fact that he uses such logical reasoning and arguments in his ideology just makes him so good to me. Also, the actor was pretty damn good at the role as well, I think. So yeah, I think I mean, I have many, but if like gun to the head, have to pick one, I think I'm probably going to end up with Agent Smith.
My number one, and I use this example so much, is Clyde from Law Abiding Citizen. Have you ever seen it?
I have not.
Oh my goodness. I feel like that movie did not do as well as it probably could have. And I think I have a theory as to why. And in the story, it is a man who he's at home with his wife and his daughter, and they are robbed. And when they're robbed, he's knocked out, his wife is killed, his daughter is killed, and they do all these very bad things to both of them. And when he comes to, his testimony and everything is really not valid because he was knocked out in the process. And he trusts the prosecutor. And because the prosecutor wants to keep his winning streak, they make a deal.
Uh-oh.
And come to find out, Clyde, who is the father, is a very smart and intelligent man that works for Secret Service and all these things that make things go boom. And when these men get off, he does this master plan to get them all. the prosecutor, the judges, everyone that had something to do with not prosecuting appropriately. And it's his way of exercising justice against an unjust system. And I think the movie is really, sometimes I can't even watch it, but it's really good. But I think it didn't do as well because there are times when it is so good that you don't know who to root for. You don't know who's the villain and who's the hero between Clyde and Nick because should have better morals as him being the prosecutor. He's representing the justice system. He's played by Jamie Foxx, and Clyde is played by, oh, I can't think of his name right now, but I think it is an amazing demonstration because for some of the things that we're talking about, Clyde is operating in a gray space. He is avenging the death of his daughter, who was like 6, and his wife. Like, we want our husbands or our significant others to protect us. But does that mean go kill everybody to the point where the whole town gets shut down, you know?
One of my favorite things is either reading or watching something where you don't know who to root for because everybody's morally grey. Like that moral
Exactly.
greyness is my favorite thing ever. And I'm in the middle of maybe heading towards the end of the seasons now, but I can't remember what, maybe I'm on season 4, I think. Anyway, irrelevant. Shonda Rhimes, one of my favorite storytellers, but How to Get Away with Murder. And Viola Davis is my actual favorite actress. I just read her biography. Oh my God, what a woman. But she plays the most spectacular, morally grey, borderline sociopathic, I think, actually, in How to Get Away with Murder. But you just don't know whether or not to root for her because she's mostly got her heart in the right place, but also very Machiavelli about everything. And it's just exquisitely beautiful. Okay. I think one of the traps that newer writers fall into is making a villain like just an obstacle for the hero. So like what are some strategies? How do we get away from doing that? How do we make our villains more complex and kind of add depth so that they're not just an obstacle for the hero to defeat?
Right. I'm going to say a small caveat to this, which is we are assuming that that's what the writer wants to do. Because there are stories where they are just, I mean, no one is ever just there, but that depending on the scale and the scope of your story and also your genre, that the level of depth that you would go into the villain or the antagonistic energy will vary. But I would say that what I like to do is more of a strategy, which is like the 5 whys, if you've ever heard of it, like ask why 5 times to get to the root cause of something. So I always like to start there. It's almost like why is he the bad guy? Why does he not like well, because he doesn't like the hero. Why does he not like the hero? And asking those questions and sort of going deeper and deeper. And as you go through each one of those layers, notice what you notice. Sort of spread it out. Like start looking around the landscape of that antagonist or that villain's world and existence as to how they got there to that understanding. And I think that's one of the ways that it can give you range, whether you're looking at their backstory, their family situation, their goals, their motivations, and begin to sort of really flesh them out and see who they are and then how they contribute and integrate with your story.
I love that. So, okay, let's look at the relationship between the hero and villain then,
Mhm.
because I think that it's an incredibly important one, be it a positive one, one that falls and becomes negative, or whatever that looks like. How do we make sure that the villain is like a driving force in the story, like to make the hero act?
Mhm. One of the things that well, there's many things that we could do, but one of the things that I like to think about is like if I totally strip this character out, the story should not be able to stand. Right? We should not have a story. We shouldn't be able to just kind of phone them in, like swap out one for the other. And so I really look for a villain that sort of agitates and aggravates the situation. You also want it so that at any time as a reader, we believe that the hero is is like he's going to have his work cut out for him. Like that we really believe that he can lose, right? And I think that's where sometimes we do get it wrong of like we don't go there. And I think when you go there is why you get that moral grayness, right? That you work in those gray scales because for the hero, or if the antagonist does his job, the villain does his job, the hero is going to have to go beyond anything that he ever thought he was going to have to do in order to secure his goal, his survival, his relationship, etc. And so I think looking at what those spectrums are and how almost like a yin and yang, but you really want in the beginning for your antagonist to feel insurmountable, that there's no way that your hero is going to overcome that and still stay intact. And that's what's going to be the forcing function, right, for your hero to change.
Okay. Let's let's think about backstory then. We've talked a lot about like their why and where they've come from. How can we balance like revealing that backstory and the motivations whilst also giving some kind of like unpredictability, right? Because the villain always we always need to know what the hero is going to do, but we need to not know what the villain's going to do. That's terrible English, but hopefully you understand what I mean.
I
Like,
do.
how can we like build that anticipation for, I guess, the final battle, final confrontation?
My strategy, I'm going to start with a strategy on this. The thing that I always recommend is to plot your villain's his story arc. Even if you have a story where you don't write from his point of view, if you understand what's going on in the villain's world at the same time, we should always have some sort of essence of the antagonistic energy from that villain at all times, that there should be some sort of like friction or pushback. So if you begin, so even if, for example, because I write romance, if you are even in the meet cute, you don't see anything when it comes to if there's an antagonist other than the love interest in the story. But usually his presence or her presence is felt by there being some sort of stakes or conflict. So that's what I would suggest. Begin to sort of start mapping it out. And if you're a person where you're a pantser, I would say once you go back and you're reading your story, you want to kind of ask yourself, like, where is the antagonist right now? Where is the villain right now? How is it agitating or affecting this scene, even if it's on a small level? And as you look at that spectrum, it should get progressively worse, right? Because just as your character, your main character can experience a low, in that moment, your villain should be experiencing a high. Why? What's happening? What did they do? What does this victory mean for him and his agenda or her and her agenda? And so I feel like you should feel that presence and it shouldn't feel flat, even if that person is not on the page.
Okay, so I feel like what a lot of what we've spoken about is kind of villains in, for want of a better word, like a fantasy realm where they are an embodied villain. And you started to talk there a little bit about the fact that you write romance. So, and I haven't prepped you for this, so sorry, but this is what happens when you have an interesting conversation. I want to know about friction in a romance because
Mhm.
the love interest is always like the antagonist or like the villain until they're not. So how can they create friction without, being a Sauron character who offs, a bunch of species and people and things, how do we create that friction between a couple in a story?
Honestly, it's the same. One of the stories that because I was thinking about examples and one of the examples that I thought about, I don't know if you've read Twisted Love. And
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Anna Huang. Is it book
yes.
one? I
Yes.
loved it. Loved
Okay.
it.
So if okay, I don't think I'm going to give away spoilers, but I'm gonna just say I am just to cover myself. But if you think about it, the same way that you would have a villain to your hero, you actually have that give and take between your main male character and your female main character. So they have that same pull. So the way that they have that pull is they're unexpected. Right? They're unexpected in the scheme of what that person had planned. And loving them changes everything, even though and it's a disruptor. So when you have a love story, the female is a disruptor for him, and the male is a disruptor for her, or the she's a disruptor for her, and he's a disruptor for him, because they were not anticipated on this journey. And when you have, even beyond that, so if we use that same example, and y'all, I'm so sorry because I'm awful with names, but the main male character sort of had this plan of revenge since he was a child. And so when he encounters the female main character, he never anticipated that this was the woman that would make him question everything that he had lived for his entire life since he buried his entire family. And for her, he was a disruptor because the reality is he was an embodiment of the evil that she was trying to happy her way out of. Right? That she was trying to be optimistically I'm making up words, her way out of. And what it caused each of them to do is they had to face their wound and their hurt head on in order to get on the other side and have their happily ever after. So what happens is the very person that you are falling in love with is also the person that has to kill the thing that you've held on to for so long. And
I
that's
love
why
that.
romance is so yummy,
Isn't
right?
it?
Oh my
I
goodness.
love
And
writing
then,
romance.
then you add all the layers. You add the steaminess, the sex, the all this other stuff. But what I like to say is, like, sometimes when Jerry Maguire is like, you complete me, and people hate that. I say, I think he had the idea kind of right, but it was done wrong, which is love of the right person makes you want to be the person that you should be. And
Oh,
loving that
yes.
person, right? Loving that person is what completes them and makes them want to be a different person. And what happens is in those stories, they have to get out of their own way. But getting out of their own way means addressing the thing that they've held like their lovey. If you were ever a kid that had a little blanket or a little stuffed animal that you had all the time, your little lovey, whatever your parents called it, their wound is their loving, and they're going to hold it tight and they're going to hold it close. And in order to have that person in their life, they have to let it go. And that's where that antagonistic energy comes from. While on at the same time, you can have external ones, right? Like the suspense element. There it was, her father, his uncle, like other external things, but that's just between your main characters.
Oh, I love it. And I really,
Mhm.
really love romance.
Yes.
Okay. What do you think are the common mistakes that you see writers making when like attempting to create villains? Anything else that we've missed?
I think the biggest thing that I would want people to kind of hold on to is, like, number one, don't have tunnel vision when you're writing your I'm gonna say villain right now, villain and antagonist kind of interchangeably right now, because I think sometimes we just think of them as just being the necessary evil, that we sort of just like look at them like evil, like whatever that movie was, but that they're a real person. So instead of having tunnel vision, really look at the totality of them, even if it doesn't make it to the page, because you have to understand it as the writer in order for that energy to be felt by your main characters. And so there's that. I would also say, making sure that you align that antagonist and that villain with the scope of your story. That's a big issue of, like, if you have a short story, you do not want a villain that's trying to take over the whole entire world and bring down the mafia and like all these different things. You really want to make sure that the scope is in alignment with your story so that you really can do it justice. And I think the final thing, which you sort of touched on with How to Get Away with the Murder, is sometimes we don't go there. Like, we don't push it far enough so it really is felt, and so that your protagonist really does have to work in romance for their happily ever after. For your story, maybe for their livelihood, for their community. And so I think that's the last part of making sure like that you go there, like you really make them work for it. If you want to do it, like, don't half-ass it.
Okay, do you have any other examples of villains? So obviously we've talked about Twisted Love, but do you have any other examples of villains that you think really do embody like the qualities of a really good kind of multi-dimensional villain? And why do you think they're so good?
Okay, I'm going to give an example, but it may not be in total alignment with your question, but I think it still works. I was reading a book here like recently called The Weight of Blood. Have you ever read that book by
Mm-mm.
Tiffany Jackson? Oh my gosh. So it's a really great book. It's technically, I guess it's like I would say horror fantasy. Um, if I just was saying off the top of my head, but it is a retelling, if you will, of Carrie. And but her spin is on a biracial teenager who her father makes her live her life as if she's white, and no one in the town knows that she's biracial.
Whoa, I absolutely have to read that
Oh
book.
my gosh, it is amazing.
What was it
And
called?
it's called The Weight of Blood.
Oh my goodness me. Okay, I'm literally buying it the minute we finish
Yes,
this story.
it's get ready. It's by
Is it
Tiffany.
young adult? Because I think Tiffany,
Yes,
yeah, okay,
Tiffany.
cool. So it's not going to
Yes.
be too scary for me.
Oh wait, yeah. Listen. There are some parts because I normally wouldn't, but I just fell in love with the cover, and once I started reading, I was like, oh my goodness! But get ready because it is very racially charged, and so that's what gets me to your question. So in the story, what she did is I think is amazing because it's one of the things that we can do as writers is that you look at the themes and the things that you want to explore in your story, and you allow the antagonistic energy that's in your story to sort of come at it from different angles to explore the same theme. So what she did in my mind is like almost like concentric circles, like you have a circle and a circle and a circle and a circle. So for Maddie, who was the young lady in this story, one of the things is her father. She's living with her father, who is white and he's a racist. Her mother is black but disappeared and she never knew her. And he, straightens her hair to where she's running from the rain because we know if you have curly hair and if it rains, so, so what's happening is she's considered Mad Maddie. She's considered odd and weird because she can't really take showers like she should because of the steam. And it's just like so many layers. But what she does for the antagonistic energy and air quote villain is that there's so many layers. There's the layer that's closest to her, which is her father, who is the man that she loves and is the only person who's raising her. And she's still trying to wrestle with how he treats her and how he almost villainizes religion and villainizes her, another part of her being to the point where she is ostracized all the way around. Then there's another layer of that circle that goes out a little bit further, which is the student body and the students. They tease her, and in the very beginning, because I'm not giving anything away, it rains and her hair turns into this huge afro and they throw pencils and they like she is again confronting who she is and her race and what does that mean from her immediate peer group, and it causes a huge stir. And then there's another layer of it which is like systemic racism and racism in school to the point where she was setting it so it was modern, but they even so had like a black and a white prom in a modern context because it's a small country town and it is okay. I'm air quoting, it's okay because that's what we've always done. And so here in this story, even though it's not your traditional villain, it is. And what happens is Maddie, therefore, is confronting this energy on all levels to in the most intimate sense, parental. And then the sense of like how we sometimes get our understanding and identity, which she's struggling with when it comes to our peers and our environments and then even greater from a sense of systemically, the school district, the teachers, her world. And so if you think about your stories and you really want to utilize it, it's finding multiple ways to have this experience and how it can come from the most unlikely people, right? If in your story, you can have someone that can be their best friend, but if they're telling them a truth that they don't want to hear, that's antagonistic energy, right? Like it feels like you are like you're coming for me. Like, are you coming for me right now? And it's like, no, but maybe there are because there may be ulterior motives to that. And so I think that in that story, it's an amazing depiction of a villain. And another layer to this, which you didn't ask me, but I'm going to give it for free, is sometimes when you read outside of your normal circle of books, you can look at something like a villain or antagonist from a different perspective. Like you may not use, for example, systemic racism as an example, but you may say, how can I layer this to really push my hero into their greatest self, right? And really cause them to stand up and get out of their comfort zone. And it doesn't mean that they mean them to the point of villain where they are meaning some sort of malicious intent, but it can still be a conflict and how they solve an issue. And your hero has to rise to the occasion if they plan to be a hero of their own story. And so I think now in this story, like it goes crazy because if you've ever watched Carrie, then it does. Listen, she did all of that. But I think looking at it and having the opportunity where you really do feel, and then you have the opportunity to play with the levels in which it shows up, right? The ups and downs. And it just makes it so that you are invested. And I think that's ultimately what we want, right? Between the dynamics of all of our characters.
Absolutely amazing example. And I'm not going to lie, I've already brought it. So sold, sold. Um, so I think maybe deepening that question. This is the last question before I ask the ultimate podcast question. But you've kind of talked a little bit about it. But how can writers use like those villainous goals or even like innate beliefs, whether or not they're right, wrong, or, how they developed them, but to like shine a light on deeper societal issues? You kind of used an example there already, but like, are there any things that you think a writer needs to like sew into the narrative or sew into the characters or sew into the plot in order to really like let the villain like represent those morally negative elements? I don't know if I'm explaining that well enough, but hopefully you know what I mean.
I do. I would say, first of all, I may be an outlier here, but I really feel like that is more of a brand question. And then it turns into a story question. Because I think that there are some people, and this, I would listen, I'd love to have a conversation about this, but there are some people that think like all books are meant to be like this, right? And I don't think so. I think there are people who you are purely doing for entertainment, and you may not be looking for the bigger thing. But just the thought of like having found family can complete where your biological family may not have been where you needed them to be is enough. They're not trying to change the world. They're trying to just give people a snippet of like, maybe I can lean into my friends and maybe I can lean into my friend groups to help me to understand where, you know what, my mom just didn't do what she could have done. But if you are the person that is your brand, I think what I would do is beyond exploring the details of your antagonist, I would say sit down and explore your themes. And I would say really think about like how each of those characters maybe embody a representation of whether the arguments or how it shows up. Just as a small example, I find that as a writer, even though I have multiple pen names, I think every one of my stories still point back to the same core elements, the same core things that I want people to walk away with. And that has informed me as an editor of that. We've got to say the same thing a million times. If you have kids, you know this. You got to say the same thing a million times sometimes for them to get it the way you want them to get it. And I think books can be the same way, that you explore the same thing, looking at it from a little bit different angle from the top, from the bottom, from the side. And so I would say if you find that that is true for you, when you are going through in the beginning, the having that theme at least a little bit in your mind would be great. And then when you go back into your editing process and you start reading the story, then you can begin to ask yourself, how can I heighten this? How can I add more layers to this? Are there other characters in the story that I can get to bring in some more light or a different perspective? And without it feeling preachy or feel like judgment, but maybe in a sense of starting a conversation, even if it's just a conversation with ourselves.
I love that so much because I write what I like to call like Netflix and popcorn books, but they happen to be queer. And like I know when queer fiction started coming out, I didn't mean to say coming out like that, but that's hilarious. Well done, Sasha. What a pun. When queer fiction started being published, a lot of it was about coming out, which is great. And, you know, in one way, that's a political conversation. But as a queer person, I don't always want to read stories about coming out. I just want to read a story where someone is gay, and that's not even the story. The story just has, they're just in it, right? And that's part of who they are. And I think that's so, and that's why that's what I write. And people, you know, I have been asked, are you ever going to write? And I'm like, I don't know. I just want to read stories where people are queer. Like, I don't. So yeah, I absolutely love that. And that you said that as well. So thank you. Okay, well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
um, this is gonna sound so crazy, but I feel like I release my inner rebel every single day. Like deciding that I want to be an author as a living, you know, deciding that I want to do this independently, deciding that I want to do this like as a Black woman, writing Black romance. I think I'm releasing it every day because I'm choosing to live my life on my own terms and really don't care what anybody else is going to say about it and loving every minute of it. And I hope that through that, whether it's my clients, my children, they see through the example of like you pursue the thing that you love and it will take care of you, and that you have this opportunity to express all of the things that we've talked about, what I think is important, what I love, what love means to me, how love changes things, how it causes us to grow. And even if they're swinging from the chandeliers, you know, in a couple of the scenes, that is something that I absolutely love, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere or do anything else.
Amazing. Well, tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your books, your services, anything else that you'd like to add.
Okay, sure. You can find me online at danjatales.com. That's DANJATALES.com. Y'all, I'm on social media, but don't look for me on there because I don't check it enough. And so yeah, like I'm always there. You can just find me there, and yeah, that's what I do, writing stories and helping people to tell the stories that they've always wanted to tell because their stories matter.
Yes, they do. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's listeners and all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Dana Pittman, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Okay, next week I'm going to be joined by Petra Taylor, and Petra is incredible. She is one of the women that I am working with at the moment, and Petra has been helping me project manage the Kickstarter and basically enabling me not to be a complete clusterfuck of a human. So we are going to be talking all about project management for authors, project managing Kickstarters. So join me next week for that.
Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.